try to imprint everything on my walls. It's not all there. I will try to talk loud enough. If you can't hear me, let me know. And anybody who was at the annual meeting yesterday, where the conversation revolved around, do we put the phrase about the congregationalism in the bylaw? I already talk about what congregationalism is in this thing. So if you didn't know, if you're Presbyterians or something else, we'll learn more than you wanted to know. And the main thing, because congregationalism itself is really the reason we have this place. Congregationalism originated with the Puritans who came to New England, and the congregational churches, they found that the congregational church operates is the wrong word, but you know what I mean. On the profound belief that first, each individual creates his or her own relationship and understanding of the Bible, of God, and of religion. You don't have somebody else who's telling me what you believe. You form your own relationship. And the Congregational Church says that no other group other than this church that we're sitting in makes decisions about how that church operates. Each congregational church is autonomous, and which is extremely important because, in the late 19th century, Oberlin Theological Seminary was getting letters from all these young men, and they were always men, because that's all the work they were writing and saying, I'm now out in this little church in Iowa or in Indiana, and I've never done this before. I miss hearing from and learning from these great scholars that I learned from at Oberlin, and I miss having the guys I hung around with at night and talked about things we wanted to do. I'm here all by myself. The church is autonomous, therefore I don't have a board up here that I can ask. I don't have a telephone, I didn't have a television, I don't have internet, I have mail. And so I'm writing to you at Oberlin's, can't you please have something short in the summer? I can't be gone all summer because I have to be here. But a week, 10 days, so that I could interact with other people and learn again. And they got letter after letter. It wasn't just one person. It was just obviously a tremendous need. And so in 1900, at the, I want to find out, this is for I don't like to give bad information. In the Cleveland Conference of Congregational Churches met in 1900, and it was proposed to them that there be something, that a committee be formed to study whether it was feasible to have some kind of summer program to help all these young people. And I've been a Congregationalist my entire life. That's it. And I've been to annual meetings up here since I was in my 20s. And the fact that in 1901, only a year later, that committee came back with a recommendation for the conference, and the conference accepted it. I mean, that blows me away. It would have, in my brain, taken 10 years before they even came up with the wording. But they obviously saw the need was tremendous. And so they, had create a planning committee, and they had the first summer that they decided to try this. It was the end of August in 1902. And they met at Lakeside, which it still exists. It's Lakeside, Chicago on Lake Erie near Cleveland. And it was a great place to meet. It had buildings. It had a place with beds. It had a dining hall. They didn't have to think about anything except what are. And the words just run like wildfire. They were amazed that everybody who went obviously told everybody they had ever known that this was a great thing. But they couldn't come up with an agreement with the Methodists for the next summer. So they went to Potawatomi Point in New Buffalo, and many of you have undoubtedly heard about Potawatomi Point, which was best known for its humidity and its enormous mosquitoes. And so a lot of the people just left early because they were in tents there. And then the wonderful, I like to think of it as divine intervention. Reverend Hull, who was part of that original planning committee, became the minister of the Congregational Church in Frankfurt. And he took one look around and he said, I can do something with this. And it was interesting. Obviously, he was a very entrepreneurial guy because within that first year that he was there, he had not only convinced the conference of Congregational churches, he had talked to the Ann Arbor Railroad. He'd talked to the people in Frankfurt. He knew what property was needed that the railroad didn't own and talked with the people who owned that. It was pretty impressive when you think about it, all the people that he was in touch with in that first year. And everybody was not only willing, but very excited about it. The railroad was excited because they didn't have logs to ship around anymore, so they could achieve it. Frankfurt was happy because this would be people coming here and being here who were customers. And of course, the companies was happy. So that was how it started. And that's why we're here. And I've always said, if they weren't Congregationalists, so all these young ministers had some boards that they could go to in their local area, they never would have written to Oberlin and said, we need help. And so then we wouldn't have been here. Now, I'll tell you just a little about the pieces of land. Friend Henry Wanamaker he had been at the Second Congregational Church in Elyria, Ohio, and he chaired the committee that first investigated his feasibility. And Reverend Hull then talked with the people who owned the property. The railroad owned the land from Lake Michigan to Fuller Avenue. And they said that, if you could get 200 people a year who didn't live here, so they had to take the train, and they could guarantee 200 people, and if they're within 5 years had enough buildings of one kind or another that were permanent buildings that would hold, they didn't have to live in the buildings, they just have to be able to be in the buildings, 300 people. And we look at the meeting house, and that's how to get it. But if they could guarantee that over 5 years, that the railroad would give them that land. And they said that was great, except we have no space on Crystal Beach yet. And there were about 65 acres of land that the railroad was giving. So the people that he had been in touch with, it was like Crystalia, right? If you were standing on our Crystal Beach, and the little dock that sticks out just to the left, doghouse, that was probably about the end of the property that was acquired in this second, which was 17 acres. And going that way, it was going that way. So is that, oh, excuse me, going west? Yeah, yes. I mean, going that way, whatever that is. Yes. But still, I mean, there wasn't much beach on Crystal. But there was a trust called the Crane Trust. And there were, I think, 12 acres. And if you visualize that triangle kind of where's there was no South Shore Road, but there is now, and a triangle with South Shore Road and M22 and Standish Road here. That was what they bought from the trusts, and that gave them all that beach. So now we had the beach we have, and there had at one time been a Methodist camp on that property, but it was long gone. So the only building standing on any of these acres was what we call the Woodcutter's hut. And you will see that Reverend Wanamaker bought it right away. And the Simons, I believe, own it now. And people who are friends of theirs who have been inside said they had done with, as many of us did who had original cottages, instead of tearing them down and starting over, used whatever was there as a core and then simply built around it. And that's what they did. So that's kind of why we are where we are. And now we're going to go look at some of the original sites and how things evolved and why. And we will wind up back here to talk about the dining hall, which no longer exists. Existing on all of these acres when we started here was this.
A little part of the crane estate, a part of the crane estate. And Reverend Wanamaker bought it almost instant. And from what people, because I have not been in it, but people who have visited the Simons say that the core
is pretty much unchanged. It is a center room, and then everything that has been built around it. But if you look in the picture, which is somewhere after the tents, yeah, there's a color picture of tents, and after that, it is this cottage as it is now, both the back and the front side of it. Things. If you look at the pictures of the tents, it always came to my mind when I would look at the pictures here was, number one, you wearing all those long skirts, and somebody had to wash them. And we know he did, but where did they get the water? How did they wash them? What kind of sanitary facilities did they have? I mean, kind of basic information over here. And they started in the beginning, they're so close to Crystal Lake. And those people who actually came up and went right straight to Lake Michigan brought their buckets of water up from Lake Michigan. But the people who went here brought buckets up from Crystal Lake, and that was how they started having water to cook, water to drink. They put, as soon as they had rain barrels. And so, the kinds of, mostly, I mean, yes, there were people from the city, but there were to a very large extent, these were people who lived in smaller towns, often in rural communities. So they were accustomed to finding alternative ways of getting things done. And so they simply adapted right away here. They added, originally it had a small dining room in it. and that was where the people from the lodge ate. And they also had a little bookstore in there, which was kind of nice. And then in 1927, Dr. Bennett gave the money to build the community room over there. I take it back. Start that one over again. 1912, he built the dining hall over there and the auditorium there. So that was only a dining hall at that time. And everybody from the lodge was expected to eat there. And of course, there's number one, you should have car. There weren't a lot of restaurants. Of course, you can eat there. You get cooking to sell, but it was a requirement too. Is that pretty much? Speaking like, I understand it was between 40 and 48 people. And then the rest of the people either tented or started building small cottages. And many of the cottages, I'll talk about it as we walk along, because I know my own family cottage that my brother owns was a wooden tent, and many of them were built to be wooden tents. They were just a wood floor, wood side, and a roof. Yeah. And they were on stilts so that rainwater wouldn't run across the hill. Hey, Dr. Bennett donated, gave the money to have the auditorium built in 1912. And when it was originally built, as you kind of see from the picture of it, but we have these clear glass windows and you can open the side panel, but the original lodge just had wooden windows that went down. And if they were open, they were open. If they were closed, it was dark, except there was that little, I don't know what, there's a name for it, but where it's like this at the top, with the windows across the top of there. So the only natural light came from little tiny windows. And the floors were dirt, sandal floors until, and I don't know the exact year, but I know that it was probably after about 1950, but it was before 1959. And so, in that period, they put in this concrete floor. The communion table at that time was wonderful. And I remember it. Because, some things make an impression on you as a child and you don't realize they will. Because it was a slab taken from a huge tree and it polished the top and it stood on a piece of stump right there. And that was the communion table. And there was a stage and they had risers for the choir. And it was built in, as I said, 1912. And in 1959, that winter, it was apparently a very heavy snow winter. Lots of snow, but wet snow, heavy snow. And you can see the picture in your book and page after the device. You got what it looked like, and then there it was when it collapsed. And it was a total collapse. But the things that survived were the concrete floor and part of the stage. Mm-hmm. Wow. The summer then of 19, so that it was the winter of 59, like the winter starts for this purpose in January. Yet. So we had the summer of 59 where we had no structure here. And there were a number of things about that summer. One is those were the years when we had a 12-week season. So there were 12 Sundays during that summer. And it never rained on a single Sunday. There were a lot of times when it actually rained on Saturday, and more than once it rained on Saturday night. It never rained, and so they had every service, every one of those 12 Sundays, they would set up folding chairs on the slab We had a partial stage, so the choir sat up on the stage. And, and that you got a picture of it happening right there in your book. And that it was pretty remarkable. And again, I was working in the office, and they certainly they sent out little flyers asking for people to help, but financially. But every Sunday, the offering baskets would come over to the office, and there was a group of money-minded people who would count the money, and the checks just every Sunday, people, I mean, it always reflected to me how much of a central part of this whole part of the township, because those checks didn't just come from all these ministers and professors who lived on the grounds. These checks came from the people in Cristalia and along South Shore, and they took charge of talking to their friends and getting money. So by the end of the summer, they had enough money to rebuild. So we never miss a summer. Uh, so the next summer, a building that looked exactly like this was built. So the summer of 1960, everything was held in beer. And then the winter of 1962. So again, you go past the first of the year, I know the reason it's I feel really close to it. I grew up being friends with Polly Witzke Peterson, and her grandfather. She'd stayed with her grandfather in the summers, and he was chair of buildings and grounds. And I went over. I was still living in Ann Arbor, and I went over to the sorority house because she was president. And she said, "Jay, I got to talk to you." She said, "I can't believe it. My grandfather called, and the meeting house just collapsed again." And I mean, it was that kind of a thing where everybody couldn't believe that this had happened, and it was structural steel failing. So somebody, either the steel company or the insurance company or both, paid for it, and they had it rebuilt by the next summer or by next summer. And so, and it looked the same. So a lot of people never knew it had collapsed again.